So, what inspired you to get such political cunning at such a young age?
Well, my interest in politics really came because a neighbor gave me a book called The Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater. Up until that time, I guess I aspired to be an actor. And then I ultimately figured out that politics was show business for ugly people, really. But I read this book and I immediately identified with the message of smaller government, lower taxes, less government regulation of your private life, the right to privacy, a strong national defense, but as a deterrent to war rather than going around the globe looking for foreign conflicts where we had no inherent, public interest. So I immediately decided that politics is what I wanted to do, and that I was a conservative in the mold of Goldwater, in the mold later of Ronald Reagan. I've been very fortunate in that I've actually gotten to meet and work for my heroes. That's a rare thing in life. So after Goldwater went down in flames and lost that election by a landslide, I began to study the 1960 election, the election between Nixon and Kennedy, a watershed election. And I concluded, and I've written two books on this, that the 1960 election had been stolen from Nixon, despite a series of errors that he made in that campaign, debating the lesser known and more telegenic John Kennedy, perhaps his greatest single error. So I wrote a letter to Nixon, who was then in exile practicing law in New York City. And I told him that if he decided to get back in politics, if he decided to make another go at becoming president, that I wanted in. Of course, he didn't know I was at that point 16 years old. In any event, 2 years later, these are the days when the telephone was on the wall in your home. My mother came in and said, "There's a man on the phone, John Whitaker, says he works for former Vice President Nixon." I very speedily took the call, decided to go into New York City for an interview. When I arrived, it's pretty clear that they expected someone quite a bit older than I was, but I talked my way into a job as a gopher and essentially worked for John Mitchell, then Nixon's campaign manager, who would later, I think, famously and wrongly go to jail in Watergate. John Mitchell never approved the Watergate break-in. In any event, so I had an opportunity to meet Nixon, to work for Nixon, to see all the greats of the day, Barry Goldwater, Nelson Rockefeller, Billy Graham, many others. And because Nixon and Ronald Reagan were from the same Southern California political milieu, I was ultimately able to move from Nixon's re-election campaign, 1972, where I was the youngest member of the staff, to working for Ronald Reagan in his 1976 campaign, when we challenged Gerald Ford, very close run thing, and then came back in 1980 to handle the northeastern states, soundly defeating George H.W. Bush in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, the states that I handled. Then came back to handle his reelection in those same states, plus Ohio and Pennsylvania. In any event, it was in 1980, while working for Reagan, that I was trying to recruit members for my finance committee, for the Reagan Finance Committee, that I met this brash real estate mogul, Donald Trump. And once I convinced him to contribute and to raise some money, we became fast friends. After the election, rather than go into government, which I have very little interest, I hung my shingle doing public affairs. My first client was the Trump Organization. And from that time, I began to spend more time with Trump. And by 1988, I began to think about the idea of Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. I saw that he had the stature, the independence, the stamina, the chutzpah, if you will, the courage to be not just a great presidential candidate, but actually be a great president. So I may be among, if not the first person in the United States to see Trump as a potential presidential candidate, as well as a potential president.